last time we met, we went over the 4.2 presentation, and you had one worksheet to complete it. This 4.2, which savings tools should be used. You were given a handful of scenarios, and you had to identify of the savings tools that were discussed, which one or which several would be appropriate for the scenario. So remember that we have essentially four accounts that we're considering: checking accounts, savings accounts, money market accounts, and certificate of deposits, or CDs. The two kind of variables that differentiate all of them from each other. Number one is the level of liquidity that the account offers. So liquidity, again, is just how easy it is to turn that valuable asset into cash. So if I put money in a checking account, that asset is extremely liquid because it's very easy to access it and utilize it as cash. I can literally withdraw it anytime I want through an ATM or going into a bank's branch location and withdrawing the money. But I can also access it as near cash, you writing a check, using a debit card, making online transfers with unlimited number of transfers. The only thing I'm limited is by the number of dollars that I have in that account. So extremely liquid. The trade-off to that is that in terms of the level of interest that you receive, oftentimes it's zero, or it's very, very low. So there sometimes can be premium checking accounts that do offer 2, 3, 4, 5% interest, which can be very good. But there's no guarantee that the checking accounts are going to pay interest. In fact, most banks don't offer interest on their checking accounts. So oftentimes the trade-off for that high level of liquidity is low or no interest rate being paid on that deposit. All right. The next account, savings accounts, have a little less liquidity in that you can't access it in quite the same way as you can't use the money in a savings account to make a purchase by writing a check or using your debit card, right? You can obviously transfer that money from savings into a checking account to access it. So there is still a relatively high level of liquidity, just not quite as much as a checking account. And again, the trade-off now is because there's a slightly lower level of liquidity, is that you'll earn slightly higher interest rates. Now, interest rates on savings accounts are excruciatingly low, usually in the neighborhood of like 0.05%, maybe 0.1, 0.2%. You're lucky if you can get a savings account that pays upwards of even a 0.5%. So very little interest rate, though savings accounts are required by law to pay some interest. But that's the trade-off for a slightly lower level of liquidity. Then we have money market accounts, which again lower the liquidity further by generally limiting the number of transactions that you can make each month from that account, oftentimes requiring a minimum balance to maintain that account. Sometimes it's as low as $1,000. Sometimes it can be, several thousand, $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, whatever the case is. So much lower level of liquidity than the first two accounts, but then a higher interest rate. Now we're getting into full percentage points, oftentimes, maybe 1 or 2 or 3% interest rates on those. And then the last account are CDs, which have the least level of liquidity of these four types of accounts. Essentially, a CD is an account that you open with the money already in hand, and you can't continue to make deposits into that account. The money that is in that account then is also reserved. You can't take regular withdrawals from that account either for a set period of time. So you determine, do I want a 6-month CD, a 12-month CD, a 36-month CD, whatever the case is. You have to have the money in hand to open that account. Essentially, you're purchasing that certificate of deposit, and then the money is locked in for that period of time. And when the account comes due, right, you can then access that money and withdraw it or renew it into a new CD or whatever. But you do receive interest on that. And as long as you don't touch that money for the life of that CD, when the CD matures, you've accumulated interest on top of that. Right. In worst case scenarios, you can withdraw the money from a CD, but there are pretty high penalties for that. You forego the interest that you've earned and so on. And so for all intents and purposes, the money is not accessible during the life of that CD. So low to no liquidity during the lifetime of that CD, but then the trade-off is it has the highest level of interest that you'll receive for that account. So in all of these scenarios, and in your life, when you start dealing with these accounts is you need to manage those two variables, those trade-offs of higher liquidity and low interest rate or higher interest rates and low liquidity, right? And it's all based on the needs and the goals that you have in your particular situation. So looking at these scenarios, let's take a look at which accounts would be best. So number one, Mariah has twin daughters that would be graduating from high school in 2 years. They both have a goal to attend college after graduation. Mariah wants to help them achieve this goal. Just $2,000 for each daughter that she would like to save and be able to access in 2 years. So there's nothing here that's indicating that she wants to withdraw that money early or that she's going to make continual deposits into that account. So in terms of liquidity, high level of liquidity or low level of liquidity doesn't really matter to her. So she is going to want the account that pays the highest interest rate so that that money grows as much as possible over those 2 years. So if the level of liquidity isn't a consideration and we want the highest interest rate for Mariah, a certificate of deposit would be best. Okay, so it offers the highest interest rate. The money is not needed for the 2 years, doesn't indicate that she's going to make continual deposits to add to that amount. So a CD is what she needs. For the second scenario, Connor and Lisa were recently married and purchased a new house. They received $1,000 as a wedding present from Lisa's parents. They want to use this money to buy new furniture for their house in 6 months. Which savings tool would be best? So again, because we've got a set amount of time in which we don't need to access that money, and again, there's nothing indicating that we're going to add money to the account. A 6-month CD would make most sense because it would pay the highest level of interest, and they don't need to access that money for 6 months. Now, if we want to be more practical about it and just say that they want the furniture within 6 months, not necessarily a hard, we're not buying any furniture for the first 6 months. If it's just we want to use this money for furniture within the next 6 months, all right, if they need to access that between then probably a savings account is going to be best. A money market account wouldn't make sense, even though it pays higher interest, just because they may not qualify with only $1,000. They may not qualify for a money market account. And even if they do, the first moment that they make a purchase, they would fall probably below that threshold, and then they'd have a penalty for going below the minimum on a money market account. So if it's just they want to buy furniture within the next 6 months, then a savings account would be best. But if they know for sure we're not going to be making this purchase for 6 months, they could purchase a 6-month CD and collect as much interest as possible. All right, Aaron is a high school student, just received his first paycheck from his new part-time job at the local grocery store. He currently has no expenses to pay, and his goal is to save half of every paycheck from his job to buy a new car in 2 years. He needs to find a savings tool to allow him to reach this goal. So here we have a situation where he doesn't have any savings yet. He just got his job, just received his first paycheck, but he wants to save half of that paycheck for a down payment on a car in 2 years, or the full purchase price of a used car in 2 years. So here we want to save money. We want to be able to access it by continuing to add money into the account. We don't necessarily need to withdraw the money. He doesn't have the money already in hand, so a CD wouldn't make sense because he doesn't have the money and he wants to continue to make deposits into the account. Money market account he wouldn't qualify for yet because he is just starting down the road of this savings goal. So for him, a savings account would be best for that 50% of his paycheck that he's saving. Now, maybe in 6 months or, down the line, he may be able to qualify for a money market account. He still isn't planning on making any deductions or withdrawals, and he'll continue to add to it. So he may down the line convert that savings account into a money market account, continue to add to it until he's ready to purchase the car, at which point then he would close that account and revert back to it, just a standard savings account. But for right now, a savings account would be best. Now, that only takes into account half of his paycheck. The other half of his paycheck is probably not as safe or secure or convenient to just have the other paycheck and cash it out, the other half of that. He probably wants another savings tool where he can keep that money safe. So for the other half of his paycheck that he's not saving for this goal, a checking account would be best. Right? It allows him the highest level of liquidity. He can access it when he needs to. He can use it for his daily purchases. He doesn't have set expenses to pay, but he probably is buying the occasional, coffee at a coffee shop, or filling up his, a tank of gas in the car that he currently has, or just buying, random things. And so he'll need something to keep that other half of his paycheck safe. So for Aaron, I would say a checking account and his savings account are best right now. Again, with the goal of maybe down the line converting that savings account into a money market account. Next, Brittany. recently moved into her first apartment. Before, she was living with her parents, and she had very few expenses to keep track of. Now she has to pay rent and utilities for her apartment. She needs to find a savings tool that will help her manage her money and ensure that she can pay her bills every month. So here we have a need for something that's very highly liquid, that she can use it for her daily expenses and her regular costs, or regular, bills that she needs to pay. So a checking account is going to be best for Brittany. It allows her to use the money when she needs to, without limit of the number of transactions or so on. Okay. Now, because she is now living on her own, she probably wants to start thinking about creating a safety net, creating that emergency savings fund. So she's probably going to want a savings account as well to start putting some of that paycheck in. Again, remember, when you start receiving, regular employment income, when we start budgeting that money and having a plan for that money, we want to have that PYF mindset of paying ourselves first, so that we're creating a 3 to 6 months emergency account. We can also then, once we reach that threshold, we can start looking at longer term or more specific savings goals. So she absolutely needs a checking account to handle the daily spending, but she should probably start looking at establishing a savings account as well to start that process of creating an emergency fund. Next up is Brian, who has a goal to be financially secure by developing an emergency fund. He has been saving 20% of his net income for the past year. He has $2,000. He plans to maintain this balance and only use this money for emergencies. Which savings tool would you recommend? So again, most likely he just wants a savings account. It's safe. It provides some level of liquidity. So if emergency expenses do pop up, he's able to access that money when he needs to, but he doesn't need it for daily expenses. He again may want to think about converting that savings account into a money market account. He may qualify for a low-level money market account right now at $2,000. Sometimes you need a little bit more to open that account. So a savings account is probably best for him, but in time, he may, if he wants to continue to add to that, he may want a money market account just to earn a little bit more interest on that while he's not necessarily using it on a regular basis. All right. Finally, Amani and Grace want to purchase a house in 2 years. They want to begin saving money to use for a down payment on a house. They are able to save $300 per month, and they need to know which savings tool would be best. So again, a CD isn't going to make much sense, even though it pays the most interest, because they're not going to be able to purchase a CD yet with only $300. And on top of that, they want to add $300 to the account every month. And with the CD, you can't continue to make deposits. So that's not going to make sense. They don't want to, at the other end of the spectrum, they're not going to want a checking account because it's tempting to spend that money. And so they want to keep it secure, and they want to make sure that they're not spending it on a regular basis. So a savings account is going to be best for them. It allows them some liquidity if they should need to tap into that money. Ideally, though, they're saving it up, and they're making regular deposits. So, and savings accounts, while it doesn't earn much interest at all, it does allow them to add money to it. Eventually, similar to the other accounts, they may want to think about converting that to a money market account once they have reached the necessary, monetary amount. Money market account, continues to be safe. It allows you to continue to add money to it, but it does offer a higher interest rate. So they wouldn't qualify for it now, but in time they may be able to do that. All right. So those are the scenarios for that first kind of practice run through of utilizing and examining which of the 4 types of accounts to use. All right. As a reminder, in the Unit 4, the 499 unit review folder, we've got the answer keys to the previous worksheets. I'll publish the answer key to the worksheet that we just discussed now, that which savings tool. So that is there for you to look at if you need to have a reminder, if you need to go a little bit more in depth or read more closely what I would say for each of them. And then for today, you've got the Unit 4 review worksheet. All right, so page 1 is just kind of, again, just reviewing the 4 types of accounts that we talked about: liquidity versus interest rate. Okay, we're thinking back to 4.1, which is the deposit institutions, looking at credit unions, commercial banks, savings banks, and so on. And then pros and cons of those different types of accounts. or different types of institutions. Page 2 is very similar to what we just walked through. So the first 4 or so scenarios, you're examining which savings tool. So those savings tools are the accounts to put your money into, to keep your money safe, to help reach these goals. The last 2 scenarios are which institutions. So which type of banking business, whether that is a commercial bank, savings bank, internet bank, or a credit union, again, examining what would be best for them given their situation and their goals. All right. So this is what you need to get done today. I will later this afternoon post the answer keys to this so that you can have a chance to kind of look over your responses to what I would suggest for either the definitions or the scenarios, make sure that you're on the right track, and then we're ready for the Unit 4 test tomorrow. So we'll have that assessment. So do what you need to do to prepare, get this done, get this turned in, get any other missing previous work from the unit in so that you're ready to go for that assessment.